Okay, so thoughts on Wicked. I am not a Broadway girly in that sense. I've only seen one Broadway show and it was about the Supreme Court justice. So I've never seen like a musical. I don't know if Broadway even means musicals or if it just means anything on Broadway, but I don't have any. This is not my bubble, is what I'm trying to say. So this is brand new for me. I did theater in school. I've been in plays. I worked production, but I've just never been in this bubble in that way. And so for me, I was excited to jump into it. I've been listening to some of the songs prior to seeing the movie, and I've been watching what's her name? I've been watching this one YouTube video. Hold on, let me pull it up. On repeat, it makes me cry, with Jessica Vosk and Kristen Chenoweth, and they're singing a combination of Defying Gravity and For Good, and it's like my favorite video on YouTube. I play it on I just replay it like over and over again, and my partner's like, is that Wicked? I was like, this is Wicked. And then there's the movie Wicked song, Defying Gravity, which I've also played on repeat like 100 times. So those are the two things I go back to, and they genuinely like make me weep. Like I can start crying just listening to those two songs. So I did cry in the movie. I cried twice. I cried at the very beginning. The opening credit, like the opening scene is so sad. And then of course I cried. Well, I guess I cried a few times in the movie, but I cried anytime the friendship was being tested very strongly. It's a great friendship movie. I think that's what stands out to me about Wicked as a story. It is a wonderful friendship story, and that's really difficult. And talking about when two people go in two different directions, and this is the hardest part about growing apart from somebody or moving in a direction that's different. As easy as it sounds to be like, oh, my friend chose this and I'm going to choose this, there is a difficulty to it, but also a necessary it's necessary for, I think, individuals to grow apart if that's towards their joy. The Wicked experience was very cool. Croatia's theaters are like any other theater. You know, they have the same kind of ads and the same kind of vibes, except the one thing about Croatian theaters that I haven't seen in the US is Croatian theaters have love seats. So my mother-in-law and I were sitting in two individual seats, and then to the sides of us were love seats where there's no middle handlebar and the couples can cuddle. I've seen the Barbie movie in a love seat with my partner, and that was kind of fun. So that's kind of funny. But otherwise, all theaters are theaters everywhere. The theater was really nice. The sound was beautiful. The music was like very powerful. It really entered your body. I thought that was really well done. I liked it. I thought the pacing was good, and it didn't feel like a 3-hour movie, which was good because I was worried. I wish there was sort of an intermission so I could tinkle, but it's okay. I held it. I made it through. It was worth it. It was really, really good. I really liked it. One thing my mother-in-law said, which I think we all could agree on, is all stories are the same. They're just told differently. So my mother-in-law said to me, oh, it's always the same story, isn't it? And I was like, it is always the same story. And she goes, it's interesting that we still like it, though. And I was like, we do. And she loved it. We loved the movie. But we really are always watching the same kind of stories. What's interesting is to see how people identify with the characters in the story. So the podcast this week is going to be about, how do you know who you are in the story? Are you Glenda or are you Elphaba? And how do you know when you're an Elphaba pretending to be a Glenda and a Glenda pretending to be an Elphaba? And how do you know you're a little bit of both? Because I will tell you, I've been writing down names of people. Maybe you have suggestions, but I've been writing down names of people that I'm like, they want to be Glenda so bad, but they're always an Elphaba who's trying to be. Or maybe they're even a her who's trying to, you know what I mean? People are always trying to be different than who they are. But sometimes you can't change who you are because your joy isn't found there. Like Elphaba couldn't be a Glinda, even though she gets Glendified, right? As the prince says, oh, you've been Glendified. She can't actually be a Glinda. No matter how much she tries, she can't actually be her. And so it's interesting to see her move towards her joy and to see Glenda move towards her decision making. I'm not sure if Glenda is happy given the beginning scene. She didn't seem very joyful, but it's what she's always wanted and it's what her role is in life. And so the question is, what would joy look like in a Glenda? With an Elphaba, she like moved towards her joy very distinctly in the film, right? So I really liked it in that sense. And I thought, oh, that'd be a cool podcast idea to talk about like, which one are you in the story and how you feel about it? Like, I definitely know for myself, it took me quite a long time in my life to realize no matter how hard I work, no matter how many times I got plastic surgery or dyed my hair blonde, I'm never gonna be a Glenda. Like, it's not my future. It's not my story. I could never do it. I couldn't do it if you paid me $1 million. And that's really important to know about your life, because it's not saying you can't change who you are in the story. It's saying you can't change who you are in the story and be joyful if it isn't where your joy is. You will always change, but as long as you change towards your joy, you can only ever be what that ends up being, and never what you want to be outside of that. So the irony is, when we talk about destiny, when we talk about our future is written for us, what we're really talking about, I think, in my personal humble opinion, is that that sort of symbiosis with your joy. That if you really seek out your real joy, you're gonna be who you're gonna be. It's not up to you, but it's not gonna matter because it's gonna be perfect. It's gonna be perfect, and you're gonna be very happy, and so it doesn't matter. But if you try to be something you're not, you can do that, but it's going to eat up at you, and you're going to feel it, and it's going to show. It's going to show. So I really liked all of those opportunities to really ask yourself, like, who are you in the story? I liked the prince and his dilemma. I liked the whole dynamic between, who gets to be a part of society and who doesn't. Typical, very human story. Now, the irony of us always regurgitating the same stories is that it's very hard for everybody to learn the lesson at once. You can either make a decision to work within the system, like Glenda chooses to do. You can be an Elphaba who tries to rebel against the system, right? So I thought the story was a really cool opportunity for people to ask themselves, who do they want to be in the story? I also can't really blame Glenda for wanting to pick the system, because to be honest, like, she was kind of raised to be perfectly enmeshed in it. You know how I say people are born into bubbles and kind of fit perfectly in it? Glenda kind of does that. Chat says, don't forget Elphaba makes some choices in Act 2. Well, remember, I don't know anything about that. So mentioning it isn't really fair to the story. And again, I'm not talking about this story. I'm talking about what this story can represent in this isolated situation, right? Like, we have to remember, like, you might be the biggest fan of Wicked. I'm not. I have no idea what's happening. I'm just saying what this movie inspired in me as a thought process to make me think about my own life and hopefully yours. But this isn't about the story of Wicked. This is about what stories teach us about our own lives. Because remember, when I examine art, I don't examine what the artist had in mind. I examine what I feel inspired by the art. How does it make me feel, as a person? How do I become a better person? When I watch this movie, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? How do I feel about that? Who do I feel myself gravitating towards? And maybe it's none of them. Because to be honest with you, I actually wanted a third option that didn't show up, which is like where I am in the story. Like, I'm not in my Elphaba stage of life anymore. Though I'm obviously an Elphaba character over a Glenda character, I'm not in my Elphaba stage. Like, I've already gone through this realization that she goes through in the first act. And she's like heading toward, I don't know what she's going to do next, but I would love to see her, end up being in a different stage of life, but it doesn't happen for her, right? She dies. So I don't know how the story goes. Again, I don't know this story. I'm just saying, I know from the beginning of the movie, she dies, which I assumed connects to Dorothy and being thrown, all that stuff. But I wonder what her life would have been like if she meditated in the mountains. It's one of those things where I see movies and art pieces as opportunities to learn who I want to be in the story. And I think a lot of people do the same thing. I'm always just surprised who they choose, and then they wonder why the world is the way that it is. Because if you watch that movie and you chose Glenda, that's a decision. If you watch that movie and you're like, I identify as Oz, that's a decision. If you watch that movie and you identify as, the redheaded munchkin, that's a decision. Heck, if you watch this movie and you identify as the prince, that's interesting. The question is, who do you identify with? So again, when I was watching the film, I could identify with Elphaba in my early 20s. I can't identify with her now, but I can see that trope-wise, I'm obviously more Elphaba than Glenda, right? Okay, now, do you guys have any thoughts you want to talk about that's strictly about this movie? And any inspirations or thoughts you learned for, like, any meditations you had about your own life? Anything that had helped you center on or become more self-aware about? Let's see. Chat says, do you believe people can be both at different times in life? Yes, I do. Definitely. I think there's a difference between being it at your core and being it in your surface. So I think you can be a Glenda and an Elphaba, like, at the same time and contradictory. And I think one will win out the other. Like Elphaba does in the film. When she gets Glendified, she's not quite Elphaba. She's trying to be Glenda, but it doesn't work. Because if she remained a Glenda, she would have stayed with the Oz. And I think that's the point, is that Elphaba tried to be Glenda and it didn't work. It would eat her up inside. Versus Glenda, it doesn't eat her up inside, but I don't think she's joyful. I don't think the movie indicates any joy in her, especially with that beginning scene. It kind of indicates her job is like an office job almost, where she's like floating in the bubble and she's like, you know, she's playing the character that people want her to play, versus Elphaba doesn't want to play the character people expect her to play. She just wants to be accepted for who she is. Glenda doesn't want to be accepted for who she is. She wants to be loved from the out, like external. She's externally validated. She's very externally validated, which is the point. And it's hard to be an internally validated person because you do run into some social situations where, you remember the prince says to Glenda, like, she doesn't care, Elphaba doesn't care what people think. And Glenda goes, of course she does. Like, but the thing is like, internally motivated people only care to the extent of what people think of them in terms of the social expectation of the game they're playing. And even then, they're usually willing to kind of like bother people or ruffle feathers for their own sense of justice, versus externally validated people, they tend to decide if they're doing good or bad based off of how people receive them. I don't decide, especially as a gay kid growing up in a conservative home. I can't rely on my external validation, because if I did that, I would have been internalized to homophobia my whole life. If I allowed my external environment to validate my existence, I never would have been a healthy person. So it's like very important for me to be internally motivated, because I can't trust the environment around me to properly validate my values if the environment around me is like racist or homophobic, right? Chad says the first time we see her tiptoeing into joy is when her and Elphaba become close during and after the dance scene. Yeah, I would agree that we see Glenda have an opportunity to be more in sync with her humanity. But then the whole popular thing happens, right? Popular. You know, that whole moment happens, and that's kind of interesting. And like, Glenda's really good at the popular game. And that's the thing that I've been wondering. The podcast, I kind of want to center around this idea. Like, you know how Trisha Paytas really wants to be a Glenda? Trisha Paytas has never cosplayed, as far as I know, as Elphaba the way she does Glenda. But Trisha Paytas is an Elphaba trying to be a Glenda. And it's kind of weird. Like, I'm like, do you know you have 30 seconds? They're just kidding. You have 30 minutes? Like, no. But for real, like Trisha Paytas isn't a Glenda, but she's an Elphaba trying to be a Glenda. But she's not an Elphaba who has a high sense of justice. She's a Glenda personality. She's a Glenda who's an Elphaba. I think that's what it is. She wants to be the Glenda that's a Glenda, but she's a Glenda who's an Elphaba. She'll never be... She can't be popular the way Glenda is popular, but she'll never be an Elphaba because she's not alienated enough for the normal world as much. I think this is like the struggle of being a white woman, I swear, is like some white women who are not minorities in the same sense end up wanting to be Glendas. Like, I have a friend who's a Glenda who's an Elphaba. Like, you would think she'd be a Glenda. She's white and blonde, but she can't be because she's a little bit too rebellious and too into her niche. So she ends up being a Glenda who's an Elphaba. And Trisha's the same thing. Like, Trisha wants to be Glenda, but she can't be because she's actually too niche. But she's not an Elphaba in terms of like social justice or values or joy, like standing up for the marginalized. She's not that Elphaba, meaning she's Elphaba in the sense that she's alienated, but she's Glenda in the terms of her being like widely more acceptable. So there's like this dichotomy, I think, between the two elements of being the character trope and then the alienation versus the accepted trope. So Glenda is accepted and Elphaba is alienated. But then if Elphaba plays the right role, she can be somewhat accepted. And it's interesting to see those kind of things at play, I guess, you know? I wonder how many of us don't understand why we're not quite fitting in or why we're not quite popular. Because I've had my friends who are Glendas but Elphabas wonder, like, why aren't I the person? Why aren't I the Glenda? And I'm like, you look like the Glenda almost. You almost have the energy, but you don't. You're too specific. you're not as externally motivated as you think you are. I think there's something about that. Chez says, the way you just described that, I imagine Glenda and Elphaba are as hidden, and yet you can't have one without the other. There's always a dichotomy between the parts of us that are internally motivated by our values, internally motivated by our desires, and externally motivated by our community, and externally motivated by the approval of our communities rather than the there's a difference between being validated by your community because you're on the same wavelength and being validated by your community because you feel pressure to give in to them. And there's I want to create a chart of the different overlaps of where you end up, because I think some of us fall into others and not some categories, but not the others. And we wonder why aren't we quite fitting? The scene between Glenda and the prince and how they're singing and they're like, you're perfect, we're perfect for each other, blah, blah, blah. That's exactly it. He is supposed to be with her and she's supposed to be with him, but it's not fitting. They do look good together. There's an aesthetic there. Why don't they fit? Actually, one of the reasons why in real life, Ariana Grande and what's her redheaded ginger boyfriend's name? The reason that she and him don't match to the public is because they are not the perfect couple. They are she's prettier than him. What's going on? They don't match. Ethan Slater. Thank you, chat. Ethan Slater and Ariana don't look like a match. But funny enough, Ariana Grande in real life is an Elphaba. She's an Elphaba pretending to be a Glenda. Ariana Grande is manufactured. She doesn't look like that. That's not how she was born. She works towards an aesthetic to make her specifically that aesthetic. Actually, let me show you something. I'm going to have this in the pod, but you guys are getting kind of a preview. Okay, we're going to jump into the autistic bubble for a second.
I'm going to tell you something. Most autistic pretty girls were not born pretty, okay? They were born probably not very cute. And it is their special interest to be pretty. They have put in a ton of time, effort, money into their aesthetics because for them, that is their special interest. That's why I talk about it. Trust me, when most of us come home, we want to be in our comfy clothes. We want our hair a certain way. We want to scrub off our makeup. We want to have a clean face, but we realize we live in a world and a society where our looks matter. So our special interest is realizing how can we improve our looks so that our life improves. That's our special interest. The same way that somebody else's special interest might be outer space. That's why I talk about it, because most of us have taken ourselves from an ugly duckling into a swan. And that is our big thing that we're interested in life. It is our hobby, is improving our aesthetics. So when I'm talking about autistic pretty girls, they have put in a ton of effort. They deserve their flowers, okay? And they deserve to have content for them too. I'm going to tell you something.
So this is the Elphaba trying to be a Glenda. This is not because the insinuation of Glenda, she's born this way. She just is this way. She has no thoughts in her mind. She just is this way, right? When the reference of the prince thinking, she's like, oh, I know he's thinking. Glenda just is. Her parents are a part of this as well, right? But when you're a Glenda who actually is an Elphaba, you're still in the more Glenda category at the end of the day, but you're also working to get there. It takes effort. You aren't born smoothly into it, right? Some people are just born into the position. Then some people work to get into the position, and then some people don't even try. Chad says, to think an autistic person cannot be naturally pretty is very narrow-minded. I think you're misinterpreting this sentence. Most people aren't born pretty. Most people are born people. We have to groom and make an effort. And since grooming is really taxing for the average autistic person, the average autistic person can't even brush their teeth because it's so grueling and sensory issues are a problem. Showering and bathing, not to mention getting Botox, hair dye, all of that other stuff. That's why there's a stereotype of you don't look autistic though, because there is a stereotype of ungrooming, unkeptness. One of the test questions I got on my autism assessment was, do you have trouble showering? Or grooming? And I was like, no, I'm the opposite. I think my special interest is I am a little obsessed with grooming. I love showering. I love exfoliating. I love face products. I love spa days. I love grooming. And I'm the opposite of all of my other autistic friends where like there is a struggle. Now, the one thing I struggle with is brushing my teeth because of the sensory issues. So I have to buy like special toothpastes and I have to experiment with different things to be able to make it through brushing my teeth every day. And I have like methods, right? I like turn on sounds. I make sure I play videos so I'm distracted. I sit there and I think, I try not to think about what I'm doing. I can't watch people brush their teeth. I can't even watch movies of people brushing their teeth on screen. I have to look away. Like I am so sensitive to these things, but I love being clean. Like I love grooming. Like I sit there. That's why I love being in my bathroom. Like I spend so much time just in my bathroom singing at the top of my lungs, like enjoying my, my grooming habits. So again, when we're talking about, autistic people aren't born pretty, no one's born pretty. That's why they say like, you're not ugly. You're just poor. Because all of these like pretty people we see in society work really hard to be pretty because they pay to be pretty. Most of us aren't born these like genetic, statues of Davids. Like most of us aren't born these like perfect specimens. You have to work out and be on a good diet and do your hair. Like I would look very different if I didn't groom every day. Like, I mean, I look, like a person, but it would be different. Like yesterday I was at the movie theater in Croatia. And I noticed a group of friends and most of them were very, very groomed. But the one guy who stood out was the ungroomed one. And I was like, interesting. That's interesting. Like he did stand out and he looked like he didn't brush his teeth. He looked like he smelled, especially in comparison to his friends because he wasn't groomed. And I never want to look like I smell. That's like actually one of the indicators of how I feel. Like I always want to look like I smell good. Because I do smell good. But also, I think when people are ungroomed, they look like they smell bad. Ooh, Maven says, I currently am separating from myself from Christianity. And I feel like the Wizard of Oz has a very religious factor to him, even though he was just a government official. When Elphaba snatched the grimoire and said, you have no real power, I was like, oh, that's how I feel right now about my pastor. My parents are Glenda right now. I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really good way to see the story. Yeah. Chet says, would you say that at the end of the movie, Glenda had a bubble pop? She may choose to stay in that bubble, but her worldview and the context of hers has shifted. Yeah, I think she had a perception change for sure. And it started when she realized the prince was moving away from her and they were having less of a connection. I think she started to question her own reality. And then she got on the train. And then she had a realization, but she also had a bubble pop that led her only to understanding Elphaba's situation, which was, I hope you're happy now that you've chosen this. Like that line is like, that's her realizing Elphaba has the right to live the way she wants, which is a bubble pop, which is different than everyone around her. Because if Glenda didn't have that bubble pop, she would have kept Elphaba there. She would have trapped Elphaba there because she would have thought like Elphaba's gone crazy like everybody else thought, right? So I think in that moment she realized Elphaba had the right to live the life she wanted, even if it was separate from her, right? I think that's probably what I took away from it. So the beginning scene, already I was crying because can you imagine you and your best friend go in separate directions in life and your friend dies and the world thinks of her as only this like evil, horrible person, but you know a side of her that no one will ever know. And then in public, you have to sort of live this reality. And this is why it's so hard to have friends who are so different sometimes, because you know parts of them that are so great. But then at the same time, in a greater scheme of things, like in the greater worldview, obviously, some people felt like Glenda was the bad guy. That's a very difficult conversation to have. Was there even a good guy or bad guy between Glenda and Elphaba? It depends on how you view things. It depends on your perspective. It depends on the bubble. Because the dilemma of saying that Glenda's a bad guy is the same dilemma of saying that Glenda's or Elphaba's a good guy. When we don't really know much about Elphaba, except what she hasn't done. And I don't know much about Glenda except what she, I guess, has chosen. Let me see. It's all about the perspective. I can see why people want to live within this system. The system has a lot of rewards, but the system is also corrupt. It has to be. Because that's how systems work. Systems can't be perfect because they reflect people and people are corrupt. And this is why I say, I'm sorry, with the CEO, like this health guy getting shot, you can't have a system that isn't corrupt if you're praising the murder of a person in broad daylight. Even if that person you feel was a bad guy, which I agree with you, he's a bad guy. But what does being a bad guy even mean, right? So are we praising the murder? Or was this a moment for all of us to realize like we need better, kinder systems? But we didn't realize that. Nobody learned through that lesson we needed better, kinder systems. We felt just happy that he was dead. Feels weird to be happy someone's dead versus sad that we got to this point in society. So Glenda makes sense in the same way that it makes sense for anyone to play into the systems, right? Like the people at the beginning that are like, the witch is dead, the witch is dead. They're like so happy about it. And they're painting her as just like pure evil. Sure, maybe. I don't know her, but they don't either. Oh my God, Michelle. I don't know how Michelle pronounces her last name, but I love her. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Our Queen Michelle. Her fashion was so good. Guys, I don't even need to say it, but the sets and the fashion were amazing. I just wanted everyone's clothes. Everyone's outfits were amazing. Like Elphaba, Glenda, Michelle, everybody's. I literally could have worn everyone's clothes and been happy with my life. Oh, can we talk about the professor's role? Like he did a 180 and Elphaba looks so betrayed. The professor's role, the goat, he did a 180 and Elphaba looks so betrayed. Wait, you mean when he like told her not right now with the flowers because he was about to literally get imprisoned? I thought it was interesting that she had visions, like premonitions, like she saw it in her eye. Like her mind's eye, like what was going to happen. Oh, they're talking about Madame Morrible. So Michelle's character. Oh, I feel like we saw that coming though, right? Like she's a typical character in that way, right? Like the Oz's. Like everyone wants there to be like a strong professor type mentor that takes you under their wing and teaches you how to be a good person in the story. But like those stories are very specific. Let me think of a good example. You could think of Dragonheart. Oh, I'm dating myself. You probably have never even seen that movie. But in Dragonheart, Dennis Quaid plays like a mentor who's good, but then becomes a mentor who's an alcoholic. Remember that? Good stuff. But his heart was always in the right place. But then that's not cool enough. Who's a cool mentor? I guess Uncle Iroh to Zuko, but then it doesn't really work out because Zuko needs a different kind of mentor. Who's a good mentor character that doesn't end up having their own journey, but then maybe they always need to have their own journey because they're people? Is like in Naruto, he's like a pervert. Okay, Master Roshi, pervert. You know what I mean? Like you can't have these like perfect people because nobody's perfect. But then it begs the question, like, what does a perfect mentor even look like? And is that a part of our fantasy? I had that fantasy growing up, like the perfect mentor fantasy. The mentor who like leads you on the journey to be the next best version of yourself. They're just people. Trevi membership for 12 months says, I got my multicolored bubbles. Oh, let's go. Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Zeph is a great character from One Piece. Zeph is a complicated character. That's the point though. Nobody's perfect, but nobody's on a spectrum as corrupt as like the Michelle's character, right? I think that's what's important. Is Oz the place or the man? Yes. I think I always get that confused. Oz is the place and the man. He named everything after himself because he's a narcissist. I think everything is on a spectrum. Like I was talking to a friend the other night about toxicity, and every time I was like, yeah, but this family's like super toxic. They're like but this family's toxic. Everyone's toxic. I'm toxic, you're toxic. We will all have moments of toxicity. The question is, are we aware of it and are we stopping it? Because to assume you're never going to have a moment where you're like, I'm sorry, my bad, I'm being toxic. There's a difference between being a toxic person and having a moment of toxicity. And if and there's a line in the sand of when you cross of being a person who's just always literally toxic because everything you do is in the realm of toxicity and everything you do is basically okay, but you have moments of toxicity. So on the spectrum of like bad or good, that's how I look at life. I just look at life as like this spectrum. So I can see why Glenda is a good guy who works within the system, which makes her a bad guy in Elphaba's bubble. Because it's like, why are you picking this? But then you'll see Elphaba says like, I hope you're happy. You know what I mean? Like, I hope you're happy. And I hope you don't regret this. But I don't think, and I think this is kind of the point. When you're a Glenda, you usually are born into the bubble you sort of fit into. And if you don't introspect more, you're going to be probably pretty fine for the rest of your life. If Glenda went and popped more bubbles and had more realizations, maybe it'd be different, right? But I don't know. So I think that's really what's key here is when I'm watching a movie like this, I'm thinking about who pays attention and learns the lessons, who doesn't, and who's going to figure out the other option. Because I don't know where the story goes. I don't know what happens next. And I think if you just take this one at face value, it's a really good tool to figure out, like, who am I in the story? And without knowing where any of these characters go, where can I assume they'll probably head to? And do I like that ending? Or do I want a different one? Right? Can we talk about the university name though? Shiz? Yeah, what was up with that? That was kind of hilarious, but I was like, Shiz. That's pretty funny, but I don't get it. Like, why was it called that? The OG book was made in the 90s. I don't know, that screams 90s. Yeah, maybe it is. I went to look up the audiobook, but it's like 19 hours long. I was like, girl, 19 hours? That's a long time, girl. I put it on my reading list, though. No promises. I probably won't read it for another 3 years, but it's on my reading list. I saw it on Spotify Premium. So if you guys have Spotify Premium, you could read the story or listen to the story. That says, what does it take to pop a bubble to you? Is it enough to just assimilate new information, or is it that you interpret it that the bubble pops? A bubble pop is a perception shift. So the difference from a bubble pop and just gathering new information is the perspective shift. So when you pop a bubble, it should shift your perspective. If you're not shifting your perspective, you're not popping a bubble, which is why people can travel all over the world to multiple countries and never pop a bubble, because they don't have a perception shift. So a bubble pop, even a small one, should have a perception shift, even a small perception shift, where you move your perception. Now it's changed. Now I'm aware of something. Versus, if you travel around the world and you see people living in different countries and you just think, man, I'm so glad that's not me, but it could never be me because I don't live there. They do. You're not having a bubble pop. If you go there and realize, oh, they're me and I'm me and everyone's like the same. Like, I'm looking at Syrian refugees right now. And if you understand, refugees don't want to be refugees. Like, if you can process that, like, refugees aren't trying to come to your countries because they want to be there. They want to go back home, but they can't. If you understand that those people are like you, like, imagine America was in conflict and war and you had to go to a different country as a refugee. And then you found out America is better again and you can go back home. Like, most of us would probably choose to go back home because that's what people do. They go back to the place they know. So Syrian refugees going back home right now is like a beautiful thing to see. And I'm so happy for them. But all these people that were like, all these immigrants are refugees, they just want to be in our countries to take it over. You're not thinking about them like you are. Like, you would, what would you do? What would you do? You'd most likely go back home. They'd most likely go back home. Most people go back home. Now, the question is, where is home? For some people, like, I have relatives who stayed in Iraq because for them, Iraq is home. For my parents, America is home. Everybody has a different relationship with where home is. So you can have a bubble pop if a bubble pop changes your perspective, which means your perception has changed, which means you are understanding something differently than you understood it before in a really deep way, or like a very like wow way. And then you can just be a person who gathers information, but you're not understanding the information you're gathering. And then there is a difference between having a bubble pop and just learning new things. I learn new things all the time. It doesn't change my perception. But sometimes when I learn new things, it changes my perception. So I have a bubble pop. Okay, now with that said, I want to watch Ben Shapiro review Wicked because I thought that'd be kind of fun. He's in a very different bubble than us and he liked it, apparently, according to TikTok. So I thought, oh, that'd be kind of funny to watch him review it.
In my head, in real life I'm in bed, my belly's being fed and I'm okay. I'm just fine, yet all I do is whine, not to you in my mind, cause I know I don't make sense. I've been nothing but blessed, so why's my life a mess? Please tell me, cause I'm sick of thinking, yeah, I'm sick of reaching out for the truth and living life as a fool. Then